Hello. So, a few days ago I put out a poll asking whether people want a hardstyle kick tutorial or a melodic speedcore tutorial, and the hardstyle kick tutorial won. I had to make the kick first, because otherwise the video would be like 20 hours long. So instead I'll just be going through my effects chains and stuff and explaining what I did, rather than doing it live. So the final result should sound something like this. It's just your typical euphoric crunchy sound. So anyway, let's get into the DAW. So you want to start with a triangle wave 99. If you don't know how to make one of these, I have a video, it should be linked in the top right somewhere, also in the description. So you can go and look at that, and then come back here and continue watching. So it's just a basic 99 sound. And then we'll start to first link it to a mixer, and then we can start. So the first thing is just low cut. Just cut out everything below the sub. Those frequencies, they can't be heard, and they do mess up the distortion a bit. So the kick shouldn't sound any different. Now is a distortion. So this is a pretty hard distortion. For euphoric kicks, I prefer to use Misstortion too. I just prefer the sound it makes. It's more crunchy compared to the other free distortions that I like to use. I only use free distortions because I'm poor. So maybe if you have like Trash 2, maybe that would be better. But if you're just working with free distortions, then Misstortion 2 is definitely the best one to go for euphoric kicks. So I just reduce the tone slightly, and really just pushing up the soft clip to the maximum. Everything else stays the same pretty much. Oh, and an important part, the symmetry. Symmetry is super important for euphoric kicks. It's what gives the crunchy sound. So then it's just EQing. I want to boost the high mids quite a lot. Just as long as you're boosting the high mids quite a lot, as well as the highs. I usually use pretty steep, but not too steep EQ. And then also cut out the lows again. Just make sure you keep the lows under control, because sometimes they can mess up the distortion quite a lot. And yeah, it sounds like that, kind of. So then another distortion. This one is less hard and slightly less symmetry. And this is what starts to give the initial crunch. You can hear it forming now. It's just the symmetry and soft clip that I change. I usually don't use the hard clip. And then another EQ, cutting out the lows again, and boosting up the highs. This time there's a slight cut on the mids, because I probably boosted them slightly too much earlier. This boost here was just a taste, I think. But the most important part is definitely this shelf here. You can hear the crunch is emphasized by that shelf. After that, reverb. Very little reverb. I usually use the biggest room size because I prefer the large room on the fruity reverb. To me, the smaller reverb sounds kind of weird. Then lower the diffusion a little bit, but make sure the wet level doesn't get too high, because the distortions later on and compression will make the reverb sound even louder. So if you just keep it really low, then as you go it will slide into place. And of course a low cut, because reverb on sub is generally not a good idea. So next, a Camelcrusher to just add a bit more distortion. Some tube distortion. The filter's on the maximum, so it's not really doing much. Everything is just the same as it is in the British Clean preset, actually, apart from this distortion, and I turned off the compressor because we don't need to compress it yet. So then 2 more EQs. This is completely up to you how you do these EQs. You can even just put the single EQ. I actually don't know why I used 2. It's probably because I ran out of bands. But again, the low cut. But everything else, it's just up to you. How do you think it should sound? So if you run out of effects on a mixer, you can route that mixer to another mixer and then continue adding effects. And next up is the bit crusher. So this is very slight bit crushing. As you can see, the drive and downsampling are very low, but then just a bit of crush as well. Just makes it a little bit more crunchy. And then another EQ, again, to just shape it to how you like the sound of your kick. If you don't want a kick that's as crunchy as mine, just lower the highs in this EQ or these EQs. That will reduce the crunch a bit. But I generally prefer making it more crunchy now and then reducing the crunch later on. Because when you layer the 2 parts of the tail together, you will end up removing a lot of crunch. So I prefer to just make it overly crunchy now. And then finally, Camelcrusher is just the British Clean preset. That just finishes it up. So after that, render it out into 2 bits. This top one is going to control the highs of the kick, and this one on the bottom will control the lows. And you can see the 3 EQ automations which are going to be giving the kick the growly sound. Start with the high one. So we're going to start with this EQ. So you can see there's 2 bands, 1 shelf and 1 peak. The peak just sweeps across the frequencies, while the shelf starts around here and with a boost, but then as the kick progresses, it goes down and cuts off the high frequencies. So the combination of that makes the kick have its growly tone, gives it movement. After that, I compress it with an OTT. This makes the frequency balance a bit more even and makes the highs more under control. Because before the OTT they were getting a bit lost. So if in this step you mess up and cut a bit too much, which I might have done, the OTT can bring it back. And even if you don't cut a bit too much, it will just smooth out the whole frequency balance of the kick. So after that, a big spike in the mids again to make that a kind of dubstep-ish growl in the mids more present, and slight cuts around that peak, which just emphasize it a little bit more. Now is a saturator. Again, any saturation will do. This saturation also massively reduces the bass, but not all saturations have an EQ built into them. So you can just put an EQ and then a different saturation if you don't have this exact one, but this one I'm pretty sure is free. And the reason why we're taking out all of the lows is because they're going to be filled by this other kick sample. So next, EQ, taking out the lows once again and really boosting up the highs. The high boost again reduces over the duration of the kick, which adds even more movement and makes the tail of the kick nice and bassy, which is what you want. Then finally, just an OTT to finish up and compress everything. And that's the high part of the tail completed. So now we're going to do the low part. The low part's a bit simpler because there's no movement. It's just the low part of the kick as it is, and it's very simple. Just want to cut out all the highs, as well as cutting out everything below 20, because again, those mess up the mix and take up space where you really don't need frequencies there, because you can't hear it. So then this is reducing the stereo, because it's a sub sound, and subs 95% of the time should not be in stereo, because stereo in sub will take up a lot of room in the mix, while that space could be taken up by other stuff. Camelcrusher to compress and distort slightly, again with the British Clean preset, but I increased the distortion a little bit. Then another EQ cutting out the highs, as well as this frequency. This is a frequency that was being a bit strong and conflicting with the fundamental frequency, so I cut that out slightly. And then here's what they sound like together. But then you can combine them together with a bit of compression and an EQ in a bus. So if you just route the two mixer tracks that you had your two tail pieces on, route them to one, and then on that mixer you can put a compression and an EQ to make the tail sound more together, to make them sound less like two separate sounds and more like one sound. So that is the tail part of the kick. Thank you and goodbye.
And I care.